Welcome to Momentum for Change, Voices of the Missouri Movement. This is a monthly podcast produced by your coalition, and I am your host, Nora Mosby, a member services specialist at the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We hope that you enjoy this conversation coming to you directly from Voices of the Missouri Movement. Some episodes of Momentum for Change have conversations that include content and descriptions of domestic and sexual violence, which may be alarming or activating for some listeners. Please take care and visit the MOCADSV website or call our office to connect with supportive services. Welcome to episode 8 of season 3 of Momentum for Change. I am your host, Nora Mosby, and Momentum for Change is a podcast brought to you by the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence to connect voices of the Missouri movement. We have a very exciting episode to bring to you today. We are joined by Judge Darrell Missey, the Director of Children's Division at the Missouri Department of Social Services. Darrell is here to talk about some exciting new services that they are currently providing at the Missouri Children's Division that are really focused on prevention. I am somebody who's very passionate about the issue of prevention. Darrell is very passionate about the issue of prevention. And I know many of our listeners are also very passionate about prevention. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you, Darrell. We're also going to be talking about best practices for domestic violence advocacy programs to connect with Children's Division and support the health and well-being of children and families and local communities throughout Missouri. So, Judge Missey, thank you so much for being here. It truly is an honor to have you on the podcast to talk about this very important topic.
Thank you, Nora. It's wonderful to be with you today.
So, as we're getting started, can you tell our listeners about your role at Children's Division and what it is that you do as leading this very important department?
I am the director of Children's Division, which I guess what does a director do? I guess the director directs, right? So I'm not playing the instruments. I'm just sort of in the front, waving my arms around. I think that my role is very policy driven, very much an outward communication type of role to the rest of the world and to other agencies. The nuts and bolts of what's going on is really being driven by my deputy directors and the regional directors who make up our executive team, and they do great work. I see my job as getting them the things they need to succeed and setting a vision and making sure that we bring folks with us as we try to work for the kids and families of Missouri.
And how long have you been with the Children's Division now?
It's been 2 years and 7 months and however many days. Not that I'm counting, but we're closing in. It's 2.5 years. We're closing in on 3 years now.
Wow, you have achieved a lot in the last 2.5 years, and I'm really excited to get into that. But before we do, before you joined as the leadership at Children's Vision, you were a judge, which is a very interesting background to have. Can you talk a little bit about how your many years of experience being a judge informs some of the work that you do at the Missouri Children's Division?
Well, sure, absolutely. And actually that work as a judge was informed by my work as a lawyer before that. You know, I tell folks all the time, look, judges are just lawyers doing a different law job. And that's the way I looked at it. It was an important legal job, but it was a law job. And the reason being a judge was not something that was really my ambition or was on my agenda. It's something that kind of happened to me because I was a lawyer, becoming involved in these kind of cases, child welfare cases, where I saw people being treated unfairly, and I saw how difficult it was for the kids and for their parents and for their extended families. And I thought we should do something different. And so I ended up running for judge. That was over 20 years ago. I ran, I won. I did what I could to make that system as fair as I could there. And you saw all different kinds of fact patterns, and you saw all different kinds of scenarios. Once a case came to a courtroom, to me, it really seemed kind of late in the game. It was like we were picking up pieces and trying to pick up pieces as fairly as we could. And so I was honored to do that work, and I think things were somewhat better because we did things correctly there. But the fact is that it was still really troublesome. So when I was I was almost to 20 years. I was going to retire. I was going to retire and leave. And it was at that point that the director of the department asked me, the Department of Social Services, Robert Nodell, asked me to be the director of Children's Division. And I thought, wow, that's an opportunity, because it's a chance to do what I could never have done from the bench, because I could not do from the bench, which is try to move our interventions upstream before all the pain happened, before that family ends up getting busted all apart because of the circumstances they find themselves in, and try to help earlier in order to prevent trouble. And so that's really been the focus since I've been there. These two things kind of dovetail into each other, and I'm honored to have done both of these roles.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're explaining it, I hadn't really thought about how your experience with other family law cases and other juvenile cases even would expose you to some of the hardships that families are facing in Missouri. And that's a really important insight to have as you're leading Children's Division.
I think that's true. And I think, whether or not a case becomes a Children's Division case, a dependency case, or whether it's a delinquency case, to say we're talking about the kids' conduct, or whether it's just a really difficult family custody case with the two parents who are litigating against each other, two different sides of the family litigating against each other. A lot of times that just has to do with how we find them. A lot of the issues that we have exist through all of those systems. There's a common thread throughout all of them. And I've been trying to message that we need to have a more thoughtful, evidence-based and proactive approach to all of it. Because from those things stem they all stem from the mental illness and the substance abuse and the poverty and the family dynamics from which all of these troubles spring. It all kind of comes back to if we can remedy the underlying causes of these troubles, things will be better for the kids and the families.
I have a background in public health, and so you are just speaking my language, and I love what you're saying about addressing root causes and going upstream. It's just very exciting to hear you talk about. So child welfare is, of course, a very complex issue. There's a lot of things that you could choose to tackle with Children's Division. What issues were happening in Missouri that you wanted to take on as you were leading Children's Division?
Well, what I knew was that we had an extraordinary number of kids in foster care per capita, and that it seemed that child removal was not only the most extreme intervention we had, it was often the only intervention we had. And we waited until things got bad enough to finally take children from their home before we would engage a problem. And I thought that's not the right way to do this. And in particular, the particular measure of that for me was the number of kids in care. At the time that I started, Missouri had 14,200 and some odd kids in foster care, which was double the national average, and fully 1% of our child population was in state custody. And there's no way we should be at that level. But the experts tell us that the United States uses this more than it should by a lot. And so the national average, which is too high, is 5 kids per 1,000. We had 10 kids per 1,000. And so the goal really was, if we do practice well, if we intersect and interact with families early to help them before removal be required, and once a child's into the system, move them quickly to either get home or to get to the place that will be their home, we should reduce the number of children in care. And we've been able to start that needle is moving. It moves almost every week in the right direction. So we're hopeful. We're very hopeful for that. The number this week was something under 11,700, like 11,600 and some odd. And so we're really moving it in the right direction, and I'm very hopeful for what the future holds. That's
such promising data to have. It's very exciting to see that the needle is moving in the right direction.
So yeah, there's this great chart that I've got in my office that, it looks like a ski slope. It's like when we showed up, and then it just keeps going down and down and down and down. And it's like, it's really a beautiful thing. And it's being done safely. I mean, people understand there are going to be outliers where some tragic story is going to happen and people are going to, say, oh, gee, maybe we should take all the children in foster care. And it's never been because of the policies that we have here. It's you can't make policy based on one bad decision or one bad circumstance. You can't, you shouldn't. And to the degree we can avoid it, we won't.
Yeah. So some people might say that foster care is providing, a safe place for children to go, and that's certainly true. But what are some of your concerns with foster care, and why do you think it's important to prevent children from going to foster care when possible?
Well, it's traumatic on children. It really impacts them in a way that is difficult for us to describe. And I saw it from the bench. I would take a child out of a really difficult, hard situation, which I'd sign the order, and I should have. I would do it again if I did not have any other choices, right? It was what you had to do. And you place them in this much nicer, cleaner, more stable foster home place. And sometimes that went splendidly, but often those kids did not react well to that. They would have trouble they didn't have before. They'd be on psychotropic medications they never needed before. I'd have kids running away. I have kids, attempting suicide. I had all these problems that you had, and I knew when I was on the bench to do this. It was, and oh, by the way, if you can't find a relative placement, which the law says we are supposed to, and common sense says that too, they do much, much better than children who go into stranger placement because they don't know or have anything in common with these new people. And so the trauma of that is difficult. So when I took on this task, I knew that was a problem. But then I started reading the studies with regard to this, and they're legion. The studies about the impacts, not of the abuse and neglect. Of course, the abuse and neglect is a trouble, and those are ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and they impact these kids. But the difference between kids who experience just that and the kids who experience that and then on top of it are removed from their home, it's drastic. How bad it is for people, the trauma. The children who go into foster care are twice as likely to have PTSD as people who went to war. If you compare similarly situated children, the ones you remove and the ones you don't remove, the ones you remove are more likely to go to prison. They're more likely to be on drugs. They're more likely to have mental health issues. They're less likely to complete their education. There's not a single measure that's better for a child who's removed if you can avoid it safely. So I know that's true now. And there are biochemical reasons for that. There was one study, a Dr. Charles Nelson, who was a professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, said, there is so much evidence on this that if anybody paid any attention to the science, they would never do this. Mm-hmm. Well, we know we have to do it, but I think all of that information is relevant and important for us to understand that when we do this, and we have to, when we do it, we better count the cost. We better not do it because we're tired of the ed neglect, or we're frustrated by somebody not finishing their services, or that's it, I'm done. I'm taking you to, I'm locking you up. I'm taking your children away. It can't be like that, because we've got to understand the impact on those children when we move them like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were joining Children's Division, taking over kind of the direction that it was going to go in, you developed what I have read and think is a fantastic report called A Plan to Rebuild and Reform Children's Division. Can you tell us a little bit about that report? Because you cite a lot of the evidence that you were just talking about, some really good data about the short and long-term impact that foster care can have on children. And so tell us about that report and what came of it.
Yeah, a lot of people credit me with the report because I guess I am the main wordsmith of it, but it was not really originating with me. Before I wrote one word of that, before I formulated any of that, I went around the state to all 46 judicial circuits and did vision surveys of all of our people in the field and said, what do you think? It wasn't one of those check the box, 1 through 5. It was, what do you think? Write it down. I will read it. And what I asked, what have we done right? And what do we need to work on? And what's your vision for this organization? And over and over and over again, I heard people say, if only we could get involved earlier, if only we could help people on the second hotline instead of removing their child on the seventh. If only we could do something different than what we do. And it was everywhere. They were talking about team decision-making meetings, which we had started and then stopped. They all wanted to do those. They wanted to, I can't tell you how many people use the words child snatchers. We don't want to be child snatchers. We want to help people. I mean, it was in every circuit, everywhere. And so that philosophy and that thought process was there. And I was so relieved because it's why I came. It's why I did that. And then, there were a lot of ideas from people inside of our agency who were saying, these are things that we could do to reduce the number of kids that have to come into care. And there's the things we could do to move children to their more permanent placement more quickly. And so after taking all that into consideration, we drafted that document that is out there on the website to talk to the legislature, really, because we needed to make a request. First thing is we needed to stabilize our pay. We needed for these workers to be able to stay. I mean, not just, we want to attract the best and the brightest. We already have a lot of the best and the brightest, but they're there not because of money. They're there because they care. And so, but they've got to be able to afford to stay. I mean, they've got to be able to pay the rent. And so we were the last in the nation in terms of pay. That we made real progress because of that, because the legislature understood that plan. But included in that were 100 new people. 100 new people just to do prevention, to get out front of these cases, to not be case carrying, load carrying people, but to be people who are in place out there to see problems and make proper referrals to services without causing the stigma of an investigation or the fear of being observed all the time, but instead just being in place to help. And that we have deployed 80 something of those people now. But the idea is we get them in place and get them trained to do team decision making meetings and to help engage with families and slow down the number of cases that come in. Included in that plan were lawyers for the Division of Legal Services to help us litigate the cases, finish off cases, and get cases to move out more quickly. So if you look at it like a system, if you slow down what comes in and you speed up what goes out, the number that are sitting in care should reduce. And when it does, we should be able to get our caseloads where they belong, and we should be able to make sure we're not taking children that we should not be taking, and that the people we have are the people we need to have, and then get them to the place they need to be as quickly and safely as we can. So that's the plan.
A plan with multiple components that has been put into action. And I will go ahead and include that plan in the show notes of this episode for our listeners.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like you were really drawing upon expertise here in Missouri to strategize and develop kind of a better response for child welfare. Was this following national trends as well, or have you seen this happening in other states?
No, it is happening in other places well ahead of us. And there are states that do this just wonderfully that we can learn from and that we're trying to learn from. And I particularly point out Maryland. I talk about Maryland all the time. And the reason I never thought I would talk so much about Maryland. But the reason I talk about Maryland is demographically, it's a lot like Missouri. It's the same size. It's got similar poverty levels. It started out with similar numbers of children in care. I mean, in 2006, they had like 13,000 children in foster care. So it looked like Missouri. Over the years of doing the kinds of things that we're doing, of engaging families early and of trying to get them to the right place as quickly as we can and resolving cases, they've managed to take their number of children in foster care to under 4,000 safely and effectively. And it's kind of a model. And so we're working to get there. We're working to be Maryland. We got a long way to go to get to be Maryland, but I think if Maryland can do it, Missouri can do it.
I like that thinking. I mean, we've seen it happen. And so that can inspire a lot of hope in the action that you're taking.
Well, and it's already started. It has started. And we haven't had those prevention workers out on the ground they've not been on the ground for a year, and we don't even have all of them hired because there are places we struggle to hire people. But by engaging our communities and our court partners and everybody else, understanding what the goal is and the rationale for it, we together have been able to move the ball. We've really made progress. I'm very pleased with it.
That's great. That is so exciting to hear about, and interesting that it's also happening in other states as well, that we can glean information and lessons learned from where it's happening in other states.
Well, it's really interesting. One of the states that's interesting to look at is Kansas, because because we and Kansas were 4th and 5th in the nation in terms of number of kids in foster care per capita. It was bad. This past May, I was in New Mexico talking with, it was a conference with people, states with rural jurisdictions. And so one of the deputy directors from Kansas was there, and we were talking about it. And we've been dropping, since I've been here, 1,000 a year. Kansas at the same time has been dropping 500 a year, which is exactly the same pace because they're exactly half our size. And, we started to talk about the things we were doing. And a lot of it had to do with mindset. A lot of it has to do with what you're doing. And one of the things that they're doing that I've been talking about was asking certain questions before you remove a child. And there are questions that are posed by certain judicial jurisdictions in Iowa. And I talked to the director in Iowa when I first started, and she said, Darrell, I'm sending you an electronic care package, but I especially want you to pay attention to the 4 questions. I'm like, 4 questions? Yeah, there are 4 questions where people ask these, the number of kids coming to care gets cut in half, where they ask these questions. And I thought, oh my goodness. And so I've been talking about these 4 questions, and I was asking the person from Kansas, well, what have you been doing? She said, well, mainly we asked the 4 Iowa questions. I'm like, really? You're asking the Iowa questions? So she goes, oh yeah. We put it on refrigerator magnets, and we put it on squeeze balls, and we put it on, notepads. We put the 4 questions everywhere. And I'm like, it's really amazing. And the 4 questions are, can we remove one, could remove the danger instead of the child? Mm-hmm. Number 2, if another adult moves into the house, would that remove the danger? Mm-hmm. It's a good question. Number 3, could one of the parents and the child move out and remove the danger? And the 4th one was, could the child temporarily go be with a relative or a friend, and that would alleviate danger, which is a TAPA, a temporary alternative placement agreement. Yeah. And if you ask all 4 of those questions before you do something, instead of just saying, is this bad enough for a removal, you're asking questions that get you to, and is the removal necessary? Right. And that is a very different question. It's a less judgmental question. It is a more thoughtful question, and it's a question that results in better outcomes for the kids. And so Kansas is doing that. I've told people I want squeeze balls. If Kansas has squeeze balls, there's 4 questions on them. I want them.
I can't wait to see those squeeze balls.
Oh yeah, they're little squares. They're little squares. You can squeeze them. It's great.
It makes sense. It's really identifying safe options where kids can go before foster care. It makes so much sense to me.
Well, and you know what, Nora, everywhere, and in the conversations I've had with your folks too, I use a medical analogy all the time, because when I was doing this, I was staying with a friend of mine who's a hospital administrator, and he was always saying, if we did medicine this way, we would be killing people. We can't do this. And basically, he said, look, if foster care is your most extreme intervention, it is your intervention. It is the most drastic thing you do. Then, every time you do it, I mean, if we did surgery every time we could, we'd be really injuring people, because the surgery is a trauma. You just don't do it unless you have to do it. And we wait to do it. We have to do it because it's a trauma. It's got risk of infection. Even the anesthesia is bad for you. We don't want to do that stuff. And so think about it that way. So I've really been communicating that that's the way we should see foster care. It is something we have to do when we have to do it, but we need to make sure it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the child. It's going to hurt the family. It's going to hurt. And sometimes we have to, but we try not to.
Right. Interesting. Such an interesting take on that. So I was lucky enough to hear you speak when you came to the coalition. You just happened to be good friends with MOCADSB's CEO, Cheryl Robb Welch, and she invited you to come and talk to us at the coalition about some of this exciting stuff that you're doing at Children's Vision. And one of the things that you brought up, I'm a bookworm, I'm a real reader, and you talked about your interest in Simon Sinek's book, Start with the Why. And I really liked that approach because it just makes sense, and very practical strategy for addressing a very, very cumbersome issue, which is child welfare in Missouri. So can you talk a little bit about this book and how it informed your approach?
Yeah, I use the cover of that book in my presentation that I give to people. Start with why. Why? Because you need to understand the underlying ideas behind what you're doing before you do them. And we should not be just doing things because we've always done it that way, or just because, well, the law says. Well, why does the law say that? And should we change it? I mean, you've got to ask for underlying purposes of everything you do. And so I'm asking the underlying person, why do we have children in foster care? Why do we remove children? And if you start with that question, then it will inform you as to when you should and should not do it. If you're doing it just for safety, you don't do it just because you're mad at a parent. You don't do it just because they're living in a substandard situation. You don't do it just because they've made bad choices. You do it because you have to, because if it's just about safety. So you start with why. And so I talk about that Simon Sinek book. I just thought of it just now, but another Simon Sinek book that has had great impact on how we have run the division is the book Leaders Eat Last. Because in that book, he talked about authority and how it is most effective to push authority as close to the information as you can, rather than having a very top-down kind of approach to things. Give people the power they need in the spaces they're in to do it. And so, both of those things I think are really informative to me. Know your purpose and empower your people.
I love that. You can achieve so much that way, working collaboratively with others. So you've talked about the 4 questions to ask to find alternatives to foster care placement. Is there anything else that really works well when it comes to preventing foster care placement?
Well, I think you don't wait for the problem to get bad enough. I think it's being proactive. I think that's why these prevention workers are out in the field, and people are like, well, what are they going to do? And what are their duties? And what does it look like? And I'm saying, we're going to figure that out as we go. We're going to discover it, because it's going to be different in every place. And it's that engagement and that community engagement. I think that if we, the government, I'm the government, and what I know is what I can't do. I know that we can't fix all these problems. We've never been able to fix all the problems. The problems are in the communities, and the problems are in the families themselves. I mean, they're experts. They're experts on themselves. And so I think that prevention approach, just being there, because you'll get to a problem early. You'll get to this is a dirty house and this child doesn't come to school. Mom is starting to have some serious substance issues. Her family knows it. They're doing an intervention right now. That's a whole lot better than we ignore it. Oh, there's a meth lab. There's an explosion. There's something goes, it's just better to do it earlier. And really that idea came from, as I toured the state, I was in Springfield, and I was meeting with only one family-centered service worker, the person who was trying to help a family stay intact, right? And we did not have many of them in the state because we did not have enough people to do the work. Yeah. But she was there, and they cobbled together one, and I was standing with her at her cubicle, and I said, so this is where you work? She goes, no, this isn't where I work. This is where I log in. I said, really, where you work? She says, I really work at Republic High School. She said, they've got a cube for me over there. I go over there and I run interference all day, every day. I go over there and I find out about a problem and I make a referral to a service, and I find out about this issue and I go and check on the family. And I thought, that's amazing. And so I talked to her circuit manager and I said, hey, that's a great thing that she's doing. He said, yeah, you know what happened? From the time she went over there, the number of hotlines out of that school district got cut in half. Wow. Just by her presence. And I thought that's a piece of the solution, is having a presence in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, I love what you said about the response is going to be different in every community. But it sounds like what the work that these your prevention team is doing is actually different for each and every family based on the circumstances that they're dealing with.
You bet it is. And that's part of why the team decision-making meetings starting up again is so important. Yeah. Because those families are experts on themselves. Mm-hmm. And they often will know when there's a problem, and they will have some answers that, and I knew this. I handled a felony criminal docket, and you go through a felony criminal docket, hey, you start reading the plea colloquy and you get into their personal stuff, you realize that, man, you're a foster care case. You're a foster care case waiting to happen. And I often would think in my mind, man, I hope the children's division doesn't find out about you. And I'm thinking, that's a bad thing. If I'm more worried about what what the state agency is going to do to this family than what they're doing. Because you know what? They would manage it. You know, I'd have people say to me, well, when I'm doing well, my daughter lives with me. Mm-hmm. And when I'm having a relapse, she stays with my mom. Mm-hmm. And people do that everywhere. I mean, the reality is that's happening all the time. You know, people have been doing this for millennia. I mean, before there was a child welfare system, before there was ever any of this, you know, my old law partner, Nick Gass, away, he was always asking, what is this child welfare thing we created? I mean, used to be we had the probate code. And, you know, if a child's parents were in prison, you know, one's in prison and one's gone off with her drunken boyfriend, we find the aunt and we get her a guardianship and we take care of it, you know. And he used to say that's he would talk about all the people who were raised by their relatives in the county who were important people, and then he would go to our literature. He'd like, look, it's in our literature because it reflects reality. You know, Tom Sawyer was raised by his aunt. Spider-Man raised by his aunt.
Right.
Luke Skywalker raised by his aunt. You know, and so if your dad becomes Darth Vader as a Dark Lord of the Sith, you've got an aunt somewhere. You know, and so that's you know, but it was true. And you know, it was interesting at the same rural convening that I talked to the folks from Kansas. I talked to the folks from Hawaii. Hawaii has got something special going on, I think, that has a lot to do with the culture, because they, you know, and I talked with Daisy Hartsfield, their director there. She says it does have to do with our culture. She says, you know, your ohana matters, and your ohana has the answers. And it doesn't just have to be just whoever's in your biological family. It's like, who's the chief of your community? It might be. You know, it might be the person in the neighborhood everybody relies on. It might be your pastor. It might be it might be your great grandmother. It could be any of those things. It's the chief of your ohana, and they convene a meeting, and you start having a conversation about how do we address this. And isn't that more connected? Isn't that just so much more compassionate, merciful, and right? I think it is. And I really. And by the way. So you look at Hawaii, they've got 1.5 million people, and they've got under 1,000 kids in foster care. Okay. And of the kids they have in foster care, 80% are with relatives. I mean, Missouri, we're pretty proud of it. We're pretty proud of ourselves that we're at 50. Yeah. Because there are states nowhere near us, but 80. That's Hawaii's got it going on.
Wow, that's great. Well, one of the things that you talk about in your plan to rebuild and reform Children's Division is that it is a cost-saving measure. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. It prevents further harm that children might experience. It prevents adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. But can you talk about how it's also a cost-saving matter?
Yeah, you know, the director of our division of finance tells us that it costs $30,000 a year to keep a child in foster care. Well, if you've got children coming into foster care because their problem is their housing, how much housing could I buy for a family of 3 for the year if that's what it costs to place a child in foster care? I mean, my budget is $600 million a year. Wow. Now, some of that's federal pass-through money, but it's still, that's what it costs us. That's what it costs us to take 14,000 children away from their parents. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what it costs us. And so it definitely would be more cost effective to give people the assistance they need, or to empower the community to give people the assistance they need, rather than do this reactive thing that we do. And it's interesting. Representative Jason Smith, who is our congressman from the southeast part of the state, is the chairperson of the Ways and Means Committee. And he has proposed a bill that would essentially give people the opportunity to use Social Security, give states the opportunity to use 4B money to take care of those one-time things that are going to cause children to come into care, rather than have them come into care. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a case. It was a case that was out of the Washington County area, which was appealed, and therefore we had all the facts in the appeal. Essentially, it started because the mother had terrible living circumstances and lack of hygiene that went with the terrible living circumstances, because she was living in a shed out back of a friend's house, and they took the children away, and no housing that she ever found was adequate, big enough, or anything else for the court or the system to say it was okay. And ultimately, the court reversed that case and said, after 3 years, and said, no, you can't terminate the parental rights just because his mom is poor, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, if you calculated it out, the state of Missouri spent $300,000 taking these children away from this person. How much house could you buy in Washington County, Missouri for $300,000? How much plumbing and hygiene could you provide for $300,000 in Washington County, Missouri? The answer is a lot. And so the idea of using these funds in a way that is wiser and less seems commonsensical to me.
It just makes sense, Darrell. It's so exciting. One issue that our listeners are really interested in is the connection between domestic violence and child welfare. So can you talk about that a little bit, and also the role that domestic violence agencies can play in supporting your prevention efforts at Children's Division?
Well, I think the domestic violence agencies are going to be walking hand in hand with our prevention workers. Mm-hmm. I think our prevention workers are going to know who those people are in those agencies and know the services we need to get people to, because those are the kind of things we need to do. The same thing is happening, by the way, with mental health and the youth behavioral health liaisons. I think a lot of the same kind of work is going on. But, I tell people all the time, look, abuse, we see abuse. Abuse is rare, but as I've seen it, I don't have a study, Nora. I'm just telling you based on what I've seen over 30 years. Abuse is often perpetrated by a domestic partner of somebody who can't get away.
Yeah.
And if we have adequate resources given to victims of domestic violence, to get the housing that they need, to get the protection that they need, to get the counseling that they need, to be able to avoid all of that, we're going to mitigate a whole lot of suffering by that victim and by that victim's child. One thing that bothered me over the years, from the time I was a young lawyer, I experienced this, is that we would have a person would be a victim of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. Because those children are witnessing that domestic violence, we say that's not appropriate. And so we remove those children. And so we have double victimized that victim.
Yes.
We've traumatized the child and we double victimize that victim. So I think that, in fact, there's some conversation that has happened inside of our agency with regard to the prevention workers, because we hope the 100 isn't all of them. And we hope that we're able to reduce the number of kids in care. And as we do, we can shift more people toward prevention. That's sort of the idea. That really is the grand scheme of the plan. Mm-hmm. When that happens, we're talking about people having specialty. And domestic violence is one of them. Because we see it so much. We see it so much that children are removed because of the violence of somebody who is not, if we could remove that danger, if we could remove that domestic violence, we would mitigate the need to dissect that family.
Yeah. So what do you see as the role of local domestic and sexual violence advocacy organizations in collaborating with Children's Division?
Well, for one thing, I think is educating people about this. Mm-hmm. I think letting people know that this is a real thing and that we need to provide people with supports. I think that it's interesting because when I was talking about this with our court partners, I was at a meeting with Judge Patricia Breckenridge, who was she was a Supreme Court judge, was just retired. But she has been an advocate for this kind of work all along, and belief that communities could do it themselves. And she talked about domestic violence. She talked about, at the beginning of our state's movement toward having ex parte orders of protection and having things that you could do to protect people from domestic violence. She looked around Nevada, Missouri, and said, "We don't have a shelter. We don't have anywhere for anybody to go. And we don't have any money to get one." And instead of throwing up her hands, she said, "I'm just going to call a meeting. Let's have a meeting." And called a meeting of the right people together and said, "Hey, maybe we can put something together." Yeah. And the consequence was, she said, Nevada got a domestic violence shelter, which stands to this day. And that is the kind of thing that has to happen. So I think that the aspects of our work that coincide with each other with this domestic violence situation, I think we will see resources ramp up in a community, because one of the things that we're asking the community to do is rather than I've got a flow chart that I show to people, and included in this flow chart is this red box full of services. We're going to refer people to all these services. And what I'm asking people to do is to fill that red box, fill it with things that you don't have, like Judge Breckenridge's domestic violence shelter. Fill it with those things that we can refer people to, get people to, so that we can help them rather than destroy their family. That's a better thing if you can get it. And when I was a lawyer, one of my favorite clients, and she was struggling. She struggled with depression. She struggled with mental health. But the thing that brought her child into care was domestic violence. It was the thing that brought the child into care was the fact that her evil new boyfriend was knocking her around and knocked the child around when he did. And he ultimately went away, but then it exposed all of her other problems, and she wasn't. And I just always thought if somebody could have helped her at the front end of this case before this system found out about her, she would have both of her children. They would both know and love her. They would have gone on with their lives. So it's all it's all a piece of the prevention. It's a big and important piece of the prevention.
And I've heard from our members who are domestic and sexual violence advocacy organizations throughout Missouri that they're already connecting with Children's Division around these prevention efforts specifically. And so those relationships are happening, and I know they will continue to happen.
It's so exciting. That's exciting to hear, Nora, because that was the hope.
Yeah.
The hope is if we put those people out in that community, that it would be organic. We didn't plan that. We didn't say, oh, let's get with the domestic violence organizations and make this happen. It's organic. It's happening. And I think the CFSR, this Child Services Federal Review, the review we just went through, we're coming up with our performance improvement plan, our PIP. So you get a CFSR and then you get a PIP. We're working on both those things, but one of the things that came out in that review was our lack of services. They talked about our service array. We have an inadequate service array. I've been telling people it is somewhat presumptuous for us to call what we have an array, because an array means a lot of stuff. We don't have an array. We have a smattering. We have a service smattering, right? But we're going to build an array. That's what we're going to do. We're going to build something together that really will work. And again, it's going to be kind of organic. It's going to be what a community needs. And so to hear from you that our prevention folks are intersecting with the domestic violence organizations out there is very promising and exciting.
They absolutely are. So we've seen these relationships happening, and we know they'll continue to build into our array of resources that we will soon have here in Missouri. You've also talked about just seeing a reduction in foster care placements and being able to hire more staff at Children's Division. Is there anything else about the current state of your plan that you'd like to mention here on the podcast?
Those are so very important. I would also note the number of relative placements we have is expanding and going up. That is happening rapidly. The amount of time kids are spending in care is going down. And part of that is because we're willing to do guardianships when it's time to do them. Back in the day, and this was classic bureaucratic thoughtlessness is what it was. Is it somebody whoever did the Adoption and Safe Families Act, whoever wrote it, it's the most misnamed bill in the history of misnamed bills, because it was, you had some adoptions, but the families were neither more safe. It basically said you're on the clock, and it's an arbitrary clock. And if you don't have your stuff together by this date, or we're going to terminate your parental rights without regard to whether or not that child's got an adoptive placement, and without regard to what you're dealing with or what the connections are with your children. It's really a terrible law. But one of the things that happened subsequent to that is that people began to acknowledge that, adoption isn't always the best option for a person. If a child's bonded to their parents, if a child is bonded to parents and with a relative, there's no reason not to do a guardianship, because it makes more sense. You don't have to end the parents' rights. You don't have to go through all that litigation. You don't have to do any of that. You can simply do what we've done for generations. and actually has happened in practicality for millennia, which is letting families take care of themselves. And so we're ending a lot of cases with guardianships because it makes sense. And some people say, well, that's not as permanent. Well, listen, a lot of these adoptions aren't permanent because a lot of them go bust. And permanent, not everything that's permanent is good. You know, it's permanent. Scars are permanent. The question is it stable, and is it useful for a child? And those are different questions. So, people talk about, well, the people could, the parents could come back and litigate over it. Well, they can, but they normally did not. I did this for 30 years, between being a lawyer and a judge, and I rarely saw a parent come back and fight against their relative and try to get their child back. What normally happened instead was the guardian, who had started this when they were 65 and are now 75, come dragging their own child back to court with the grandchild and said, Judge, look, when I started this, I was 65 and now I'm 75. That child was 3 and now she's 13. And her mother has been clean for 5 years and is a general manager down at the Walmart. So I want you to give this child back to her. Well, let's check it out. And that's it. But see, nobody had to lose anything there.
Right.
They just took care of themselves. They took care of each other. I had circumstances that were not ideal, but we can't create circumstances that are ideal, but it works. And oh, by the way, if you've got a probate court going on, you've got a judge around still to help with it. So that shift, that very practical and effective shift, I think is something that I'm really happy about that we're doing, because it gets kids to what we call permanency. I don't use the word a lot because it's not real, but it gets kids to where they need to be more quickly, and in a way that is more merciful, compassionate, and thoughtful. And so it's not right for everybody. Nobody should force an adoptive parent. Nobody should force a foster parent who wants to adopt into a guardianship, but that's not most of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with family members.
Yeah. I'm sensing, picking up on a little bit of your approach to child welfare, and that is finding what works, doing what makes sense, using the information we have around us to inform a strategic approach that's practical and that works for the most amount of people involved the best.
Yep. And the other component of that is listening to people. Mm-hmm. Listening in particular to the kids. You have no idea. People don't listen to them. I mean, people are like, well, how old is it? How old? When I was a lawyer and when I was a judge, I would talk to them and say, how young would you talk to kids? I'm like, well, from the time they were talking. That's when I would start talking to kids. I would, I'm not like I'm going to put on a 4-year-old to make a decision about their life, but I do want to know from a 4-year-old, how you doing and how do you feel?
Yeah.
You know, and you find out things from them. And so, listening to these teenagers, we got a whole bunch of teenagers run away. Why? Because nobody listened to them about where they wanted to be. Yeah. Well, it makes a difference. So it's all very practical. None of this is rocket science. But I think my hope is that it's common wisdom, that it's thoughtful and compassionate and right. And I hope that's what we continue to do now and long after I'm retired. I hope that's going to be Missouri's approach to this.
I agree. I think when we look at things that are practical, we're also identifying things that are feasible, that are possible, that we can actually take action and do.
Right.
As we're wrapping up, is there anything else you wanted to say about your prevention work at Children's Division?
I think a lot of the credit for this goes to our team.
Yeah.
I came here with the heart for it. I came here with the desire for it, but there are so many people who desperately want to do it. Our deputy director, Danielle Corley, is masterful in leading and in strategizing this. Lauren Hall, who's our prevention person, our team, Elaine Castillo, I could go on and on. Michelle Dixon, just the whole team. They're terrific, and they're offering great leadership. And I think, again, it's going to continue for a long, long time, because these people have a lot of time left in this agency, I believe, and they have the right mindset. And I think eventually Missouri will be looked at as a model. That other states will look at us the way we're looking at Maryland and say, hey, we want to do what Missouri did. I think we're going to get there. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I've had the privilege to meet some of those people on your team, and agree. You've got some fantastic people on your team that are doing incredible work. When you came to the coalition, you told a story about a yarn doll. Would you like to share that story with our listeners now?
Well, sure. So when I started this, I read a lot of leadership books. I was reading a lot of books. I read a lot of books. I read Simon Sinek. Well, I read another book by a guy named David Novak, who was a Mizzou grad, who became the CEO of Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell, which is Yum Brands. And he turned them around, and therefore he got to write a leadership book. It was great. But he talks a lot about recognition. And when you listen to his podcast, he would talk about how he would recognize people with things that mattered. And it wouldn't be, okay, we're going to give people a bonus or we're going to make somebody employee of the month because then everybody gets their month. And what he would do is he would go to a place where they like Kentucky Fried Chicken, someplace where somebody at Kentucky Fried Chicken had done something really great, and he would give them a token of his appreciation. And what he would give them is a giant rubber chicken. He'd give him a giant rubber chicken and sign it. Thanks for your great work, David Novak. And I thought, that's great. I could recognize people that way. I thought I could give people giant rubber chickens. Well, that makes no sense for this. I thought, well, what would symbolize good work for kids and families? Well, I was thinking about that when I was packing up my stuff in Jefferson County and coming to Jefferson City. I found in a box a yarn doll that my mother had made for me when I was 7. And the reason that thing mattered was because, and part of the thing that fueled all this for me was the fact that my own family had some challenges back then. My mom had a severe form of mental illness. She got a severe form of bipolar disorder, which was managed much better in later years. But early on, it was very hard. Things were rough. And one time she had to be gone for 3 months. She was at a mental hospital for 3 months. And while she was gone at that mental hospital, she made this yarn doll for me. She made one for my sister too. And I kept it all those years. I still have it. I never got rid of it because it said to me that my mom, even though she is struggling, she's still thinking of me. She still loves me. She's still there for me. And I kept it all those years. And so I thought, nothing symbolizes to me when somebody has done something really special for a child and a family than a yarn doll. So a guy who does not like crafts, and I can't tie my shoes, and I had trouble untangling my earbuds here. I learned how to make a yarn doll. And so I make yarn dolls. And I give them to people. I give them to people on our team in recognition. They win the coveted yarn doll award. If they've done something really great for a child and family. I've given them to people outside of our agency. Judges and lawyers and Judge Breckenridge got one. She got the Lifetime Award Yarn Doll Award. I give them to people who have done something really cool. And so I've got a stack of them in my office. They might be looking out, do something cool for a kid, you might get a yarn doll.
I love that. And those yarn dolls, the array of yarn dolls that are now probably across the state of Missouri, symbolize just all of these amazing people that are coming together to make things better for children, to make things better for families. And that's powerful. So.
Oh, right. And I know it. I know that the work being on the real success is not happening in Jefferson City. It's not happening it is happening out on the ground in Clinton, in Sykeston, in Hillsborough, in Troy, in St. Louis, in Springfield. It's happening everywhere on the ground where people are interacting with kids and families and doing great work. And when I catch people doing it, they're getting yarn dolls. By the way, people have started telling on each other about doing good stuff. So I'll come and get an email from somebody saying, "Hey, this person was really awesome. I think they need one of your yarn dolls." And to the degree that I can get there, I give people yarn dolls because it really is a thing we should do. We should recognize people when they've done great stuff.
It's important. And there's so many great things that are happening. This has been such an inspiring episode. I have learned so much from you, Judge Missey. Thank you so much for joining me on the
podcast. Thank you, Nora. And you and everybody else in the world should call me Darrell. It makes me feel better. It makes me feel more like a person.
All right. Thank you, Darrell.
Yeah, it's just great to have been with you, and I've enjoyed it a lot. We had some technical difficulties. If you all see some glitches in here, it's because my Wi-Fi was lousy. But But we made it through, Nora, and I really enjoyed our conversation a lot. Thank you so much.
We certainly did make it through. And thank you so much, Darrell. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. We look forward to next month when we'll host another episode of Momentum for Change. And thank you for tuning in this month.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. This has been a recorded conversation now available in both video and podcast formats. A video recording of this episode is available on the MOCADSV YouTube channel under the Momentum for Change playlist. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel in order to receive new episodes in your YouTube feed. You can also find all of our Momentum for Change episodes available to stream on Spotify or wherever you find your podcasts. Momentum for Change is a podcast produced by MOCADSV with post-production support provided by Tim Stillings and promotion by Adrian Maddox. Again, I am your host, Nora Mosby, and we appreciate you joining us for this episode. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next month.